in the city of storytellers. We sit facing the sea, my friend and I, feet swinging, palms gripping the concrete ledge like hinges on a door. It's a dark sea on both sides. Water, traffic, us caught in between. Queen's necklace chokes the city even at this hour. Kids run on the pavement. Couples are coddling by the trees while chaiwalas squeeze their day's worth from pensive city rovers. My friend turns to me, cocking her head to one side. "Let's play a game," she suggests, wrestling with the wind to tame her hair. She divulges no details, no rules, as she begins a sentence about a black crow. Instinctively, I follow it up with one of my own, carelessly adding to her tale until we're spilling private details that masquerade as fantasies. The breeze carries our words, perhaps to someone waiting at the other end of the ocean. Or maybe this is a story born to drown. Who knows? The city has swallowed whole too many stories anyway.
That was Aashika Suresh reading her poem In the City of Storytellers. You are listening to A Poet's Work, a podcast where you will hear the poems from the poets around the world. I'm your host, Ashwamegh. Here's what you need to know about the poet in today's episode. Aashika was born in Chennai, and now she lives with her mum and indie pup Ingee. She is a writer, a dreamer, and a sunlight seeker. Her selected poems have appeared in numerous online journals and anthologies. Her work was shortlisted for the Srinivas Rayaprol Poetry Prize in the year 2019. She writes about all the things that move her, both literally and figuratively. I sat down with Aashika and listened to her poems to find out how she uses the power of poetry. Here's another poem by Aashika titled Day 153, after a photograph by Roshan Siddharth, followed by our conversation.
Day 153. After a photograph by Roshan Siddharth. Garden of ice, spare me the slap of silence. A season ago, there was song in my street, a crows on an electric pole. A ringing ear is proof of life. From this glass cage, I have looked my present in the eye, unable yet to reach and stop its gradual fade to black. Garden of ice, I refuse to let your cold shoulder break me. I will hold out for the golden hour. It can't be too far. Frozen time will thaw into a pool of children, each one racing to the school bus to see who will be the first one to snag the window seat.
So, Aashika, what's your fascination with the city and why are you mentioning the sea dark?
So the first poem that I've written about is about Bombay or Mumbai. I was there for about 9 months for work, and it was my first time ever away from home. So I was still coming to terms with the fact that, I was living away from family, adjusting to a new life. And as a lot of Mumbaiites do, one evening I went to the beach on Kolaba. That's where the Queen's necklace is. And I was sitting with a friend and just staring out into the sea. And I noticed that there were people thronging all around, right? And there were so many stories that I probably wouldn't ever know about. I would never find out about. It was like a sea of people. There was the actual sea on one side and sea of people on the other. And the
Yeah.
two of us were just sitting there by the ledge looking out at the water. And, I was feeling forlorn and missing home. So I was wondering how I would be able to make my own story in a place like Bombay where so many stories already abound. And if, any of what I did would matter, if my voice would be heard. So that's where the poem came from a place of longing and of wanting to belong and to get my voice to be heard.
Okay. So is this same for every city? Like when you move to a new different city, you feel the same?
I haven't actually moved anywhere apart from Bombay. I was in Bangalore for a short period, but I didn't feel the same. But I think Mumbai has a way of making you feel insignificant. Unless you're extremely powerful, right? Unless you've already made your name, then it can be a city of glamour and it can give you everything you want. But for somebody who's starting out and who's moved from a slow place like Chennai, it can be quite overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, like for me, it was a month time in Bombay. So I lived there for a month and then I left. I never went back.
All right, you couldn't adjust, or
Yeah, my mine was not. I was trying to adjust there, but I was not more comfortable there, and it was kind of more pacey life. And
okay, true,
I'm more of a peace kind of person, so I don't like that.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
people are always on the go in Bombay, right? Like there's always so much happening, there's activity and there's a buzz. So unless you're inclined towards that, it can be difficult to make yourself feel at home there.
Yeah. And from your childhood, like what writers did you enjoy reading as a child, and did you used to write then?
I used to read a lot as a child, but back then I read a lot of fiction, not much poetry for obvious reasons. I don't think a lot of children understand or like poetry.
Yeah.
But I was a voracious reader of Enid Blyton. I've read, all the famous five, Secret Sevens. Nalri Towers was particularly interesting to me. Uh, I also read R.L. Stein, Goosebumps.
Hmm.
When I grew up a little more, I gravitated towards J.K. Rowling. And it was only when I went into college that I started consuming poetry more consciously. Until then, it was mostly, fiction writers and
Yeah.
stories.
Yeah. I mean, like you need to have your way of life with the poems, so to understand them.
Yeah, that's true. Like poetry is not everybody's cup of tea, and it's not something that everyone takes too easily. And I think that's a huge misconception that poetry is difficult. I think there is a lot of slice of life poetry out there that once you start reading, it gives you a deeper insight into life. And that's why, as an adult right now, I consume more poetry than any other form of reading.
Yeah. And like when you were in college, how did you get started as a poet? And when did you wrote your first poem?
Weirdly, I wrote my first poem when I was 5 years old. Um, I think it was just a consequence of, listening to a lot of rhymes, nursery rhymes,
Yeah.
and I liked the rhythm of it, and I found it easy to write poetry. So I wrote my first poem as a 5 year old, and then I sort of kept at it. I still have a little notebook where I would note down all of my poems so I can look at my, progression from when I was a 5 year old kid to right now. Some of them are extremely cringy, but, it's part of my repertoire.
Yeah. Yeah. Got it. And do you like handwritten poems in your diary or do you use an application to write?
I usually do a mix of both. So, my poetry journey is usually, it starts on a page. I write a lot when I travel, when I'm experiencing new things or meeting new people. So I usually carry a notebook and a pen with me and I write on my travels. But they're mostly just, random stream of consciousness writing more than a completed poem. And then I take some time to come back and finish my poem, which is usually on a laptop. I use Word to, structure it better, see if I want to add any poetic devices and, how to edit it better.
Yeah.
So, but usually my poems start on paper.
So when you get the idea or inspiration for writing a poem, how do you manifest it? Like, do you manifest in the form of a poem, or the whole poem, or you write a line and then you start writing and creating the chain of that?
Some of the greatest writers have said that uh, art creates itself. And I think that rings very true, in my case at least. So my poems write themselves. It usually starts as a seed of thought. Maybe it's a word or a phrase or just a generalized emotion. Usually my poems are around feelings and experiences. So it starts off with a phrase or a word, and from there it writes itself. I don't have a structure. I don't have, a particular direction in which I want to take a poem, which is why I do a lot of um, free verse
Yeah.
and then see if I can manipulate it into something else later on. But my initial drafts are, like I mentioned earlier, stream of consciousness most often.
And how do you think about the writer in you when you are reading your own poem?
That's a tricky question.
Yeah.
It depends on poem to poem and day to day. Sometimes I think of myself as highly pretentious. There are some pieces which I feel are not authentic at all. Especially some of the pieces I wrote, during my early college life, where I was trying to mimic poets I enjoyed, like Emily Dickinson and Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah.
I tried to copy some of their styles, and when I go back and read some of that, it's horrifying to think that I thought that I could even attempt to write something like that. But I think right now I think of myself as a emotive poet. I try to write as real experiences as possible, um, fewer borrowed ideas. I do write about other people's experiences sometimes, or
Okay.
if they've told me the story, but I always try to write it, um, from my point of view and how I am experiencing or seeing it. If that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, like, you don't have all the ingredients in your life, so you need to watch out others' lives to have those mixed kind of emotions and get those feelings, experience, so you can complete your poetry.
Yeah, sometimes. But I
Yeah,
prefer to write,
sometimes.
you know, authentic poetry that comes from my own experiences and my own feelings. I feel like those poems are more honest and a better indicator of me.
Yeah, I mean, like, my point of view, 70% of poems are your life, and 20% are like what you think and what you want to be, the imagination part, and 10% comes from others' life.
That's actually a pretty decent mix. Yeah, that
Yeah.
could work.
And since you have like mentioned a couple of poet names, so who will be your favorite poet?
It's really hard to pick one poet who I enjoy, but um, I think Mary Oliver is someone whose work I really look up to. She has a lot of uh, elements of nature in her poetry, and I enjoy that.
Mhm.
So I keep going back, and she has a lot of spiritual significance in her poems. it's a spiritual experience, in my opinion, reading her work. So Mary Oliver is someone I keep going back to. Apart from that, I enjoy reading Mary Howe. She is New York State poet, or she was at one point. Her work is also extremely relatable. I like Dorian Locks and Tishani Doshi, of course. Meena Kandasamy is also one of my favorites, though she stopped writing poetry lately. I think her work is different compared to some of the other poets I follow. It's more politically charged. It's more socially conscious. Yeah, I think these are poets I keep going back to over and over again.
Okay. And tell us about some of the books you enjoyed in the past year during lockdown.
I actually did read a lot of poetry books, more than fiction. I read Devotions by Mary Oliver. I think it's quite a concise collection of her work. It has some of her best pieces, ranging over about 4 or 5 decades. And then I read Margaret Atwood. I forget the name of the collection. I think, it's called Eating Fire. Though I'm yet to complete the book, I've read snippets of it and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I did do a little bit of nonfiction reading. I read Becoming by Michelle Obama, which was a powerful piece of writing, in my opinion. Usually you expect politicians and wives of politicians to write very stern and dry work. But hers was extremely relatable, and she had a lot of insights, not just about living as first lady, but also, very human experiences of racial discrimination and just getting things done as a woman, how hard it can be sometimes. And a lot of that was relatable and I think insightful as well. I took back a lot from that book.
Yeah, she's a decent writer and expressive one also. So you can.
I think she's an excellent writer. She's an excellent embodiment of what it is like to be a woman. I would think of her as one of my role models, to be honest.
I think most of people consider her as a role model. So
yeah, she's a good role model to have.
Yeah, and how do you compare your growth as a poet from the time you wrote your first poem and now?
Well, my first poem was just random 4 lines. I still remember it.
Do you remember that?
I do, actually. My first poem was about hills, and it went like, I'm a girl, I climb hills, I like hills, I like hills. I'm a girl, I climb hills, I like hills, I like hills.
That's so expressive.
That was the 5-year-old me sort of projecting into the future what I would like. I do enjoy the mountains and the hills a lot right now. So if I look back, it makes a lot of sense. I feel like there has been quite a change, especially over the last 3 or 4 years. I feel my growth as a poet has been quite rewarding. I used to do a lot of mimic writing where, like I mentioned, I used to write, I used to try and copy poets I enjoyed. I didn't have a voice of my own. I think over the last 3 or 4 years, with a lot of reading and writing and editing, I can't emphasize enough how important editing is. Just editing my poetry has given me my own voice and sort of helped me set the tone for the kind of writing that I do. I still hope that, 5-10 years down the line, I can say the same thing and say that, I've completely changed as a writer. That's what everyone wants. They want different kinds of work. They want to produce different kinds of work. So I just hope that my work doesn't get stagnant and I can continue to experience this kind of growth, like new experiences and new reading.
That was my conversation with poet Aashika Suresh. Once again, my name is Ashwamegh, and you are listening to A Poet's Work. I have exciting news for our listeners and lovers of poetry. I'll be taking requests for poem readings, and every alternate Sundays, you'll have me reading your requested poems. You can find the request link in the description, or you can go to apoetswork.com to make your requests. Thank you for listening to this episode of A Poet's Work. Each episode of A Poet's Work features poems and conversations with poets from across the world. New episode of our show releases every fortnight or weekly. Do subscribe to this podcast wherever you are listening to this to be notified for the new episodes. We will close out this episode with Aashika's poem titled Lessons from the Future.
Lessons from the Future. If I ever find myself responsible for a young child, I will take them up the drying hills of Cherrapunji in November to sit on a rock to watch the sunset. I will take their little hand in mine and show them how to blot out the sun with their thumb. One eye winked shut and the other slowly savoring the glow above the rounded edge of their finger. A mountain dog will sit next to us as we try to count the stars in the sky and fail. But try we will. And I hope the hills will teach them to seek out moments instead of money, to recount memories instead of milestones, and to find comfort in prolonged silences of long, lonely nights.